How's everybody doing? Good. Well, over the next 35 minutes or so, I'm hoping that you will open yourself to both an experience that I want us to share and an understanding about yourself. Let me talk about both of those just for a second. We're going to share an experience when we're toward the end of the message today, and I'll walk you through it. You won't have to, walk yourself through it, but it includes these cards that are on your seat. And I'm going to ask you in a way that I promise you won't be weird, but probably will be a little bit uncomfortable, to write something on one of these cards that is really an expression of a burden that you're carrying in some way. And then we're going to have an experience in the room where we, pass these cards in and then share them with one another. And I know it's probably hard to imagine it right now at the beginning of the message, but if you could let yourself both express a burden that you're carrying and open yourself to perhaps carrying someone else's burden, I think we could go to some next levels in our inner life. We'll get to that experience in a little bit. The other piece I want you to open yourself to is an understanding about yourself. And this is my prediction for the message, at least the first part of the message. You're going to feel attacked. You're going to feel offended, maybe defensive, because of things that I'm going to say and realities that we're going to surface together, and perhaps even things the scriptures are going to say. And if you can, why would I say you're going to feel that way? Well, let me answer that question. Because I did when I was working on the message. I'm reading through these passages, I'm preparing for this, I'm studying, and I'm like, that doesn't feel good to me. I think I ought to get off the hook for that. Why am I being accused of that? I felt all of those things over the last few days as I was preparing this message. I'm just going to hand all of that to you as well. With the understanding that if you can kind of take some steps past feeling attacked or convicted or defensive, that you could get to a place that's a little bit counterintuitive, but takes you to a next level where in your inner life, in the mind that God has given you, there's a switch that's available to you that may not at first make sense, but actually could result in the renewing of your mind, as Romans chapter 12 says. Now, over the course of this series, let me just highlight this once more. I've been talking about renewing our minds from Romans chapter 12, and I've asked you to go into this practice. So we're now starting our fourth week of this, of 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, using what's in the Suncrest app, the tools that are there, and using a notebook to jot some notes to yourself, to note some prayers, to say, hey, how's God getting my attention, or what is he leading me to do? Now, I'm not so naive as to think that everyone in the room has been doing this all of the time, but I know a lot of people are, and I also know that if you have done it every time for the last 3 weeks, that means that for 42 times over the last 3 weeks, you've taken 10 minutes just to be quiet, to be reflective, to think about the things of God, to interact with him. And at this stage, it certainly is starting to feel more natural and like it could be reshaping your mind. My guess is, if you're like me, and I haven't done it all 42 times, you've had some interruptions and different things along the way, and maybe you've only got it done 30 times, but think about how much better it is on the 30th time than it was on that first time. Last weekend, we got invited to go to a birthday party at a roller skating rink. I hadn't been roller skating in like 25 years, right? So we go to Linwood. It's the only roller skating rink around, right? And we're roller skating. I have my 7-year-old, Davion, with me. He was so excited about this. He's never done it before in his life. We get there, he wants, his shoe size, get those things strapped on, and he goes out there and they give him the walkers, right? You know what these are, like the PVC things so they can kind of stay up, just like they have them at the ice skating rinks. And on his first time around the rink, he was not nearly as successful as he envisioned himself being. And it was an outrageously frustrating experience. I think every 3 feet, he fell down again. And then we picked him up, 3 feet, fell down again. He made one lap around the rink, and he said, I'm done. And he stumbled. He didn't really roll off of the rink over to the seat. He took his skates off, and he said, that's it. He went over to the snack area, as he does, to have some snacks, and sat there for about a half an hour. until he saw some of his friends that were out there skating, and he thought, you know what, maybe I could get back out there. And he goes and puts his skates back on, and he gets the roller thing. And on his second time around, he did 10 times better than the first time around, which is still not very good. But on about his 7th time around and his 10th time around, he was doing great. And by great, I mean he still needed the walker, right? This guy wasn't like skating backwards and doing flips and things like that. You don't do that after 10 times. But I bet you, if we took him skating 30 times, it would start to feel more natural. This is how every growth thing happens. And so for those of you who have integrated this and said, yep, I'm committed to this habit. I want a stronger inner life. I might as well try this. I love it that you're doing this. And if you fell off the wagon early or you're new to our church even today, I'm inviting you into this process to say, hey, commit 9 weeks of your life, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, to these reflective exercises, and see if after fighting through, it doesn't reshape your life. Now, I've been talking to a lot of people, as you might imagine, over the course of this series about their inner life. And I've just kind of been making an observation that, of course, not everyone who's sitting in this room is in the same place with the strength of their inner life. And I want to create a few categories for you, or you could probably put yourself in. I've noticed that some people, the inner life is what I would call fragile. Actually, that's what they call it to me. Some people would say it like this. They say, like, man, in my mind, I'm just kind of hanging on by a thread. And I have so much respect for people who are fragile and hanging on by a thread to walk into a place like this and again to try to build their way out of that. I think that's just remarkable. And if that's you, I'm so glad that you're here. Some of you wouldn't say, well, I don't think I'm just hanging on by a thread. I'm not fragile, but I definitely feel fatigued in my inner life. I can't seem to get my thoughts together. I can't seem to get the motivation I need to do the things I know I need to do. Or maybe I'm frustrated about some things in my inner life and I can't quite sort it out. I definitely don't feel like I have a strong inner life. And when things do bump into me and they shake me a little bit, the things that come out of me, I'm not that proud of. Like, that's a big category of people in this room. I understand that. And then there are some people who have a really firm, really solid inner life. And for sure, the challenge for me in doing these messages, but especially today's message, is that all three of those audiences are in this room. And I would like to say something to you that's gentle enough so you can receive it, especially if you're just hanging on by a thread. But you could be tempted to be so gentle that you don't actually lead people to do what they need to do to move out of being fragile or fatigued or frustrated. And I want to lead you to that. So we're in week 4 out of 5 of the teaching series of this. Week 1, it was, as I thinketh, so I am. It's just a reminder that what's going on in our mind essentially is our identity. Week 2 was take every thought captive. And it's the idea that you're not a passive observer of what goes into your brain. You get to decide what gets in, what lands, what you do, all those sorts of things. Last week, we talked about how the truth will set us free. These are all scriptures, and those are in particular words of Jesus. And that while there are some hard truths that of course we would like to resist, embracing what is true is actually the path to freedom. And today is think of others. Think of others. When you think about your inner life, when you think about your thought life and your mind, I want you to just pause for a second and ask, how often am I thinking about myself versus how often am I thinking about others? And this is where I'll start to offend you. You're all selfish. I'm selfish. You're all focused on what's going on around you and how it's affecting you. Every one of us in this room, when you look at a photograph that's been taken and you're in the picture, your determination of whether that's a good picture or not is how you look in the picture. It's just absolutely true. We should just acknowledge that we all have pride. That part of the biggest, perhaps, part of the brokenness in us is that we're paying attention to what other people are paying attention to about us. And there's a whole industry for it. It started years ago in talking about self-esteem. And then people would write books, and a lot of us have bought them, about self-help. And then, there's certainly a growing industry these days of self-care. And it evolves sometimes into what I hear a lot now, talking about self-love. And I'm like, these things dominate our world today. And when people feel a little bit weak on the inside of our minds, for some reason we go toward saying what I need is self-esteem, self-help, self-care, self-love. And you can understand why someone might be prone to think of it that way. And I'm not here at all to go on an absolute rant against those industries. Perhaps there is a place for all of those things. However, we should just acknowledge how wild it is that we tend to just think about ourselves. And we try to give ourselves some relief. And we say, you need to take care of you. And we say, treat yourself. All of it in the same category. And this is kind of wild because, I've been recommending people to counselors for 25 years now. And the counselors that I recommend to over the last 25 years have told me that people who walk into their counseling office have largely changed in the posture of what they're looking for from a counselor. That 25 years ago and 20 years ago, when people walked into a counselor's office, they would sit down and the idea was, I need to grow. Tell me how I need to adjust myself to grow. But that the counselors tell me today that one of the biggest challenges they face is that people walk into a counselor's office and they want to say to the counselor, hey, will you help me feel better? And a lot of times the feeling better is sorted out around letting me talk to you about how bad some other people are and finding your affirmation of me. And I'll tell you, if you're a counselor without any ethics, you can make great money doing this because people will keep coming back over and over and over again if you sit there and affirm them. I think we all know today, if you're measuring how many posts there are on Instagram where people are serving, we're at an all-time high of serving. But if you're counting actual people who have committed themselves, maybe even some of us, to a serious volunteer role, to really helping my neighbor, to looking for the one who's left out and devoting time after time after time to that person, not thinking of myself, but being others-focused, we're actually at an all-time low. I had a friend who sent me a post a number of weeks ago. I'm just going to read this for you from beginning to end, and maybe you'll be as convicted and inspired by it as I was. If we all only do the things we love, the things that spark joy, the things that don't bring added stress, who does the rest? Who stays after to clean up, brings dinner to the teachers, invites the hard kid to play? Are we doing that? Who picks up the teammate whose parents work late, organizes the charity auction, works the volunteer concession stand? Who shovels the walk, paints the scenery, or babysits for the sick mom? No one. That's who. There isn't an army of people who find joy doing undesirable things. There aren't a bunch of adults with nothing better to do. There are just good people who are willing to contribute anyway. You aren't a people pleaser when you do something that doesn't excite you when you see a need. You're part of a community. When we fixate on what is good for us in the moment, we often miss what is good for us in the long run. This is the counterintuitive nature of thinking. Do we really want to live in neighborhoods where everyone only thinks of themselves? Do we want our kids growing up in schools where people only show up or care if they get paid to? Do we want to be part of families who keep score and love minimally? Do we need to wait for a tragedy before we're willing to pull together and make sure people know that they matter? That way of doing things doesn't seem to work all that well. You don't have to say yes all the time, but you don't have to say no all the time either. You don't have to run yourself ragged, but it's good to feel a little bit stretched. We shouldn't protect our time and our ease at the expense of our humanity. If everyone does a little, The burden no longer feels quite so heavy for the few. And if you want a village, you have to be a villager. And being a villager is inconvenient and hard and annoying, but it's also incredibly beautiful because a village shows up for each other in the good times and the bad, and it allows you to be part of something bigger than yourself. Say yes. Join a group, find a church, get to know your neighbor, show up at the performance, at the funeral, at the game, on the phone, and in the text. Suncrest Church, I think if each of us embraces an orientation that isn't common in this world, to say, no, I'm not primarily going to think about myself. It's bigger than that. I need to go serve. I need to go help. I need to do what my neighbor needs done. My aunt's sick and nobody else is helping her, so I'll go to help. It is actually in the inward turn of thinking of ourselves that we become weak-minded. And so this is an invitation to think of others. Where does this come from? Philippians chapter 2. The Apostle Paul is writing a beautiful passage, an absolutely beautiful passage that is primarily about who Christ is, and we will get to that part of the passage because he's encouraging us to follow the model of Christ himself. But in the beginning, this is what he says. Be humble. Think of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. And I want to ask everybody in this room, what serious commitment have you made? You've committed yourself to it that is not about you and your family. It is about doing something that costs you something for the good of the world. And I know that when I start preaching in this way, it can start to feel to you like you're feeling attacked. like you're like, I don't have time for that. But this is the challenge, right? We all end up in a life where we're not fully devoted to the good of others. We think about ourselves. You know, humility, I shared this many times before, is not a force that would say you should be down on yourself. It's a healthy way to live where you put others' needs ahead of your own. Can I say that line again? It's a healthy way to live where you put others' needs ahead of your own. Rick Warren says it this way in a quote that's often misattributed. I've also misattributed it in the past to C.S. Lewis. He says, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking about yourself less. Not being so self-focused. And I got to tell you, because I really believe in therapy. I really believe in sending people to counselors to help sort certain things out in their lives. And I told you part of the challenge before on how people are walking in to trying to find help for their lives these days. But I find more than ever, I have to really do my best to discern if I'm going to recommend a counselor to someone, is this a good counselor or is it a bad counselor? Because there's both for sure. And the bad counselor will sit in front of you and affirm all of your feelings about the tough things that you're going through and not ask you to face anything. A good counselor will lean to help you stop thinking about yourself so much and decide what responsibility can you take to put out into this world to actually face the things that are causing dilemmas in your life. To not be so self-focused. Did you know that one of the leading trends in mental health and counseling today is that instead of going to counselors and therapists, people are using ChatGPT? It's overwhelming. The statistics are off the charts on this, especially for Gen Z. And it's interesting that when you sometimes listen to people who use ChatGPT in this way, they actually love it. Because I don't know if you know this about ChatGPT and other large language models that we call AI. they are built on a model to keep you coming back. They always ask you a little question at the end, and they almost never challenge you, which makes ChatGPT a terrible therapist. I had someone say to me last week, I hope none of you will be offended by this, maybe you've used ChatGPT, but he said, hey, everybody should remember that the dumbest person you know is sitting in front of ChatGPT right now being affirmed for everything. ChatGPT is saying something like, I think you're on the right track. And why wouldn't someone keep coming back to that? Because it focuses us on ourselves and our needs and doesn't put any responsibility on us to think of others first. Can I keep leaning into this? Thanks for your permission, even though you didn't give it to me. There's an inner life that centers ourself. It leaves you then fragile and frustrated and fatigued. And your instincts are to think, I need to center myself more, but it's the wrong instinct. The inner life that centers itself, maybe you could notice this, says, I expect to be acknowledged. I need you to say thank you. I need you to say you're welcome. I need you to say you appreciate what I'm doing. I expect to be acknowledged. I expect that my leaders serve me. I expect that my leaders serve me. There's an orientation that says, well, my leaders should probably serve me. I expect from others what I won't do on my own. Now, hear me in the healthiest way. In healthy communities, in healthy marriages, in healthy relationships, you are a giver, and someone else is a giver too, and you do receive. And when it goes both ways, that's the healthiest thing. I'm not saying it's unhealthy that you do get acknowledged or that a leader serves you. The challenge here is the word expect. Because we all have to do a little work inside of ourselves to say that, hey, if I served you, expecting that you'd notice, expecting that you'd say thank you. If I'm in my marriage and I'm kind of keeping track of how often my husband or wife does not acknowledge, doesn't appreciate, doesn't say out loud what I'm doing, then we can get this in our minds, right? Then the thing I'm doing is actually for me. It is not actually in an unselfish way, given to another person. Leadership is so interesting in this way. There's a culture for a long time. It's certainly the culture that Jesus lived in when he was teaching, where, there were leaders, they were the bosses. They had servants. The servants were expected to serve the leaders. And Jesus brings about a transformational idea to the leaders. He says, actually, instead of you just lording it over the people you lead, you should serve them. He's telling the leaders, don't think of yourself. Think of the people you lead. And that's good. That's beautiful. Those of you who are leaders, I hope you will embrace the unselfish life that does that. But then in a culture, it can start to flip over to be like, so I think what's supposed to happen here is I'm the servant. That's the leader, but the leader's supposed to serve. I don't expect you to serve me. Jen was doing a beautiful job talking about the grace of God leading us into communion. God's grace works the same way. God's grace is given to you freely. He sent his son to the cross to die for you. God is not a selfish being. He's an unselfish being who thinks of you and gives of you. But then sometimes after you've received this grace from God that none of us deserve, you can start to get into a place that says, you owe me grace. And now I've recentered the most beautiful thing I could receive freely and said, now I deserve it. I'm thinking of myself first. Let me give you one more list. The inner life centers self. It doesn't acknowledge other people's hardship. It's always zeroed in on our own hardships. It doesn't frequently apologize, and it applies good teaching to other people instead of to ourselves. This is such a challenge in today's world. Everybody accuses everyone else of playing the victim. But rarely do we acknowledge the real hardship someone else has gone through and give them some grace for that. Can I just ask you, how many times have you apologized today? Is it equal to the number of times you messed up? That's a great question. Because now people don't apologize because they feel like apologizing is admitting, like, can't we just all apologize a lot more often? And then you start to think, well, I would if they did. And now we're thinking about what we need again instead of what we can give. This one on the bottom, this is the greatest challenge for any pastor like me. You teach the scriptures and you go to the commons area and someone says, man, that was a great message. I'm gonna send my son the link to that one. And I'm like, your son? You, right? I mean, some of you have been sitting here right now and I've been talking about being unselfish, and you are not thinking about yourself. You are thinking about someone else who needs to be unselfish. That's really happening in the room right now. And if that went through your brain, this message is for you. I know it's uncomfortable. Like I said, I was as attacked and as offended and defensive about this as anybody else all through the week. But if you're just holding on by a string, or if you feel tired or frustrated that life isn't going your way, the path forward is not to think about yourself. The path forward, though it's counterintuitive to you, is to orient your life in a service to others that takes us to a higher plane and puts us in a better headspace. This is how Paul wrote the rest of the passage. He said, though he was God, Christ did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. He wasn't holding his position. He wasn't keeping himself focused. He was on a mission to serve others. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges, and he took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, this is the one we're following. The one who could have claimed his position in heaven, who could have made it all about him, and instead left those positions to come and be one of us. The one who did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And he was the strongest-minded person you know. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God. And he actually died a criminal's death on a cross. Can you imagine if Jesus was using a little chat GPT for his counseling? What do you think, chat? Humanity's in trouble. I could solve it if I suffered and died. Chad'd be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why don't you take a step back? You got to take care of you first. I see what you're doing. You've served people enough. You fed the 5,000. You did this. You did that. But it's not the right answer. The right answer for the strength of our mind and to live on a higher plane is to think of others first. And therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor. Jesus didn't do it so that he would be elevated to the place of highest honor. He did it so that you and I would be saved. But by doing so, by becoming a person who served others rather than being served, who thought of others first, who let himself experience pain and sacrifice for the good of others, the result was that there was a sense of honor for him in the highest place. And actually, we all know people like this. We instinctively give honor to those who sacrifice, who aren't selfish, who think of others first. And this is tough to reconcile in our minds, but it is the path to a strong inner life, that in your mind you think of others. So I'm going to give you two things today these are just practices. These are things we want to do to make sure we're not being self-focused, okay? The first one actually comes still in Philippians 2, right after this passage that talks about this. And it simply says this: do everything without complaining or arguing. What are the practices of a self-focused person? Complaining and arguing. Complaining and arguing. No, that's not right. It's got to be my way. Oh, I shouldn't have to do that. Oh, life's so tough. And Paul says, do everything without complaining or arguing. This is a mindset shift. I'm curious whether you could take this whole week and say, not once, not from me, there will not be a complaint, nor will I argue. And when you get treated a little bit unfairly, or when something's asked of you that you don't think is right, just do everything without complaining or arguing. That's a big request from the scriptures. The vision for this, by the way, after he's done, it says, and you will shine like stars in the sky. And you will stand out in this world as a light to the world. That's what he's saying. This is who Christ was. Think about this. If you were a person who never complained and never argued, you would stand out at your office. It's so beautiful. So part of it is just not doing a couple things that are self-focused. But now I'm going to give you the practice with that card. So would you all grab the card for just a second? I'm going to ask you in just a couple of minutes to write one of your burdens on this card. Now you might start to think, well, that's kind of self-focused, isn't it? Give me a little chance here. We all have burdens. And actually, according to the scriptures, in a church like ours, in a community like ours, we would carry each other's burdens. For in this way we fulfill the law of Christ. And so I want to ask every single person in this room to jot down a burden that you're carrying. I want this to be anonymous. I don't want you to put your name on it. I actually don't want you to put anyone else's name on it. If you want to say, hey, I'm struggling with my son, that, but no names, purely anonymous. And in just a little bit, here's what's going to happen. I'll stop talking. You'll have 45 seconds to write down your burden, and then you're going to all pass them to the edge of the row. And then there's going to be a time when they all get picked up, and our guest experience team is going to take all the things that we've written down, and they're going to place them in some baskets. There'll be 4 baskets across this stage. And then we're going to sing a song together. And during that song, you're going to get up and walk up here and grab what is someone else's burden out of that basket. And this week, you're going to pray for someone. You don't know who it is. You know they're sitting in the room right now. Now, I know not all of you are math people, but let's keep this straight. I want everyone to participate, but if you don't turn one in, don't get up and get one. And if you do turn one in, you got to get up and get one. Hopefully at the end of the night, the baskets are empty. And hopefully at the end of the week, you will have carried someone else's burden and not been primarily thinking about yourself. So with that in mind, grab your card, just a few words, less than a sentence probably, and we'll collect them in just a minute. Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.